I still can't believe it. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, made what might be his worst album ever. I'm not exaggerating. This thing is bad, and it's painful to listen to. I mean, I've been a fan for years, and I've heard some duds, but this one takes the cake. It's called Paradise Hawaiian Style. The album is supposed to be the soundtrack to one of Elvis's movies, and it's just. I don't even know where to start. Let's just say that if you want to fall asleep, this is your go-to album. The first song that really sticks out is A Dog's Life. I kid you not, Elvis is singing to a bunch of howling dogs in a helicopter. The lyrics are so ridiculous that I couldn't help but laugh. He sings, "I'd find me a pink little poodle and lose my noodle over her." I mean, what? How did this even make it onto an album? It's like they were trying to make a joke, but it's not funny. It's just sad. Then there's Dattin', where Elvis tells us that Dattin' makes a girl start wiggle walkin'. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it sounds more like a nursery rhyme than a song. It's so simplistic and shallow that it's hard to take seriously. And Queenie Wahine's Papaya. This one speeds up with each verse, and it's just as annoying as it sounds. I'd rather listen to nails on a chalkboard, but it's not just the lyrics that are terrible. The music itself is bland and uninspired. The arrangements are so basic that they sound like they were thrown together in a few hours. It's like nobody even tried. Elvis's voice is still great, but even he can't save these songs from being total duds. The ballads aren't much better. So close yet so far. Could have been a great song, but Elvis seems to struggle with it. He misses a note on Slip in the first verse, and it's cringe-worthy. There's a better version on the collector's gold box set, but it's too late. The damage is done on this album. Even the bridge sections are a mess. Golden Coins has a pleasant melody, but the bridge is just clumsy. It's like they couldn't figure out what to do with the middle part, so they just threw something in there and hoped nobody would notice. But we did. The only song that's kind of interesting is Animal Instinct. It's got a funky arrangement with a jazz flute, which is unexpected. But even this one has awkward moments, especially in the bridge. It's like the whole album is a collection of songs that were almost good, but just missed the mark. Wisdom of the Ages is another ballad that Elvis tries to make the most of, but it's just mediocre. The lyrics are so cliché and unoriginal that it's hard to believe they were written in 15 minutes. And the ending is so sudden and anticlimactic that it feels like the song just gave up. I get that Elvis was in a different place in his career by this point. He was 10 years into it, and maybe he was just tired of fighting for better songs. But this album is a disappointment, and it's hard to enjoy it, even as a die-hard fan. What's even more disappointing is that this was all happening while the film industry was moving in new and exciting directions. Elvis's movies were starting to feel stale and formulaic, and this album just confirms that. It's like he was stuck in a rut, and nobody, not even Elvis himself, could pull him out. But that's not the end of the story. There's more to come, and I'm hoping that maybe, just maybe, things will pick up. Because Elvis is more than this. He's the king, and he deserves better. We all do. I remember when I finished work on the songs for Paradise Hawaiian Style. It was a rough time for me. My voice just wasn't what it used to be. I tried my best with the title song, but it was a struggle. The song itself didn't help much either. It felt like there was no melody to grab onto, and I ended up sounding thick and heavy, far from the clear, smooth voice I was known for. Another song, Scratch My Back, had an interesting bass line, but as soon as I started singing, it all went downhill. The lyrics were a bit suggestive, which was fun, but the song itself was a letdown. Stop Where You Are was even worse. The lyrics were so basic, it felt like a kid wrote them. House of Sand was just another forgettable, lightweight rock song. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. Thee Is My Heaven was a bit better, but not by much. It was a slow ballad in the Hawaiian style, but my voice was heavy and lacked the higher notes I was used to hitting. It was painful to listen to, especially when I compared it to songs like Hawaiian Sunset from a few years back. Sandcastles was probably the best of the bunch, but it still felt like I was trying too hard. Drums of the Islands was the only highlight, with a big dramatic finish that felt more like a showstopper than anything else in the movie. The film Paradise Hawaiian Style was supposed to be another Blue Hawaii, but it missed the mark in almost every way. The script was bad, the songs were weak, and I looked and sounded terrible. Despite all this, the reviews were surprisingly positive. It made me wonder if anyone had actually watched the movie. Even the reviews in big newspapers like the Los Angeles Times and Variety were lukewarm at best. They called it a light script and said I was ingratiating, but it was clear they weren't really impressed. Around the same time, RCA released Elvis for Everyone. It was supposed to be a celebration of my 10 years with the label, but it ended up being a mix of old, unreleased tracks. The album cover was a bit of a joke, with me sitting in front of a cash register and the back showing my best-selling albums with the money they made. The album itself was okay, better than the recent soundtracks, but it didn't do well. It only reached #10 on the charts, which was a low point for me. In February 1966, I went back into the studio to record songs for Spinout. It was a small step forward. The songs weren't great, but they weren't as bad as what I'd been doing. Smorgasbord was one of the worst, with lyrics comparing women to a buffet. Am I Ready was based on a classical piece and was a bit muffled, but the material was good. All That I Am had a Latin feel and was better than most of the songs I'd done in that style. I was starting to sound a bit better, but I knew I wasn't back to my best. Stop, Look and Listen was a cover that I sped up, but it still felt forced. The title song, Spin Out, had too many car references and felt too forced as well. I'll Be Back was a decent rocker, and Adam and Evil was a fun novelty song with a catchy drum beat. Beach Shack was another calypso-style song, and Never Say Yes sounded like a second-hand version of Not Fade Away. The album was okay, but nothing special. The real change came when I started recording non-soundtrack material again. In 1966, I recorded How Great Thou Art, which won a Grammy. I also started playing around with new styles and ideas at home. I'd recorded a lot of country songs, going back to the 1940s and 1950s sounds. I sang Tennessee Waltz and My Heart Cries for You with a full orchestra, and it sounded great. I even tried out some old Frank Sinatra songs, doing my best to croon like him. I also started experimenting with new sounds. I sang bass on Blowin' in the Wind, and groaned along with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. I worked on close harmonies and did some really cool covers like What Now My Love and Tumblin' Tumbleweeds. One of the most surprising things was my performance of If I Loved You from Carousel. I played the piano and gave it everything I had, starting quietly and building up to a powerful climax. It was the first time I really showed what I could do with my voice in the studio for a long time. All of this was just the beginning of a long journey back to the top. The real comeback would come later, but these private recordings and non-soundtrack sessions were the first steps in the right direction. I remember when I got back into the studio to record more music. It was May 1966, and a lot had changed. I was older, wiser, and I had a whole new sound. I wanted to show that I hadn't lost my touch, so I decided to record some gospel music. It was a natural choice because I always had a deep love for gospel, and it was a genre that really let me pour my heart into the songs. The first song we did was How Great Thou Art. When I started singing, it felt like a whole new me was coming out. My voice was deeper, and I could feel the emotion more than ever. The arrangement was different from the one I had heard before, slower and with a slight swing. I sang it with all the power I had, and it was a big moment for me. It was like I was bearing my soul, and it was a feeling I would carry through the rest of the 1970s. We also did In the Garden, a song I had wanted to record for a long time. It's a bit of a sad song, but I tried to bring a little swing to it. My voice wasn't as light as it used to be, but I think the sincerity came through. Somebody Bigger Than You and I was a bit more upbeat, and I decided to sing it in a lower key. I think it helped break up the mood of the album. Farther Along was another slow, reflective song. I tried to make it sound a bit country, and it's a good track, but maybe a little too long. Stand By Me was one of my favorites. It's a simple, heartfelt song that I think speaks to everyone, whether you're religious or not. I sang it with just a piano, and it was a raw, emotional performance. I felt like I was really living the lyrics. Without Him was a waltz, and I think it's a great example of how I mixed different styles. It's a slow song, but it swings, and I put a blues feel into the vocal. I really enjoyed singing it. So High was an upbeat song, and I think I sang it in a lower key to give it a different feel. Where Could I Go But to the Lord was another highlight. I sang it in a laid-back way, and I could feel how much I loved the song. By and By was a bit of an experiment, and we tried out different sounds. It came out sounding almost like a rock song, and I had a lot of fun with it. If the Lord Wasn't Walking by My Side had a cool organ sound, and I think I did a good job of making it both reverent and modern. Run On was the first song we recorded, and it was based on a song by the Golden Gate Quartet. I gave it a harder edge, and it was a great way to show that I could still rock. The last song on the album, Where No One Stands Alone, was another emotional one. I sang it from the heart, and it was a fitting end to the album. We added Crying in the Chapel to the album, but it was mostly to help sell it because it was a hit single. I also recorded some non-gospel songs during these sessions. Tomorrow Is a Long Time was a Bob Dylan song, and I think it's one of my best performances. It's a country blues song, and I sang it with a lot of yearning and loneliness. Love Letters was a more traditional choice, but I think I did a great job with it. Beyond the Reef was a Hawaiian ballad that I recorded with my friends Red West and Charlie Hodge. It was a fun, informal recording. Down in the Alley was a bluesy, upbeat song that I think showed I was still current. Come What May and Fools Fall in Love were more upbeat, but they didn't have the same energy as the other songs. Still, it was a good session overall, and it felt like I was starting to find my way back. A few months later, in June, I went back into the studio to record a Christmas single. I didn't show up on the first day because I had a cold, but I caught up the next day. Indescribably Blue was a beautiful ballad, and I sang it with a lot of emotion. I'll Remember You was another great ballad, and it was a shame it didn't get more attention. The Christmas song, If Every Day Was Like Christmas, was a mix of the Christmas song and an inspirational chorus. It was well received, but it didn't do as well as we hoped on the charts. These sessions were important for me. They showed that I still had the passion and the ability to make great music. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and I was excited to see what the future held. I had just come off a string of successes in late May and early June 1966, but it didn't mean I could take a break. I had to get back into the studio to record more soundtracks. It was a tough pill to swallow, knowing I had to work on more songs for movies that weren't exactly setting the world on fire. The film was called Double Trouble, and the title was pretty fitting. There were two big problems: the songs weren't great and the sound quality was terrible. Critics didn't hold back. John Russell Taylor from The Times said it seemed like my movies were made for idiot children. Ouch. Carol Dane from The Blade thought it was only good for a slow afternoon. And Lorraine Alterman from the Detroit Free Press called it a real moaner. Even Bosley Crowther from the New York Times, who usually gave me a bit of slack, thought it was just pretty fair. The title song was written by Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann, who had done some amazing work before, but this time it felt like they were just phoning it in. The sound was all muddy, and the arrangement was confusing, like it couldn't decide if it was a rock song or a TV theme. The lyrics hit close to home, though. Every time I think that I have finally got it made, some losing cards are played, I just can't make the grade. That summed up how I was feeling. The best song on the soundtrack was City by Night. It had a cool, jazzy vibe, and I put some real effort into it. But my voice wasn't in top shape, and the mix was awful. You could barely hear the band, and the trombone solo by Richard Knoll, which set a great mood, was almost lost. Long-Legged Girl with the Short Dress On was the single, and Billboard thought it had some of the energy of my earlier hits like Blue Suede Shoes. But it felt forced, and I was just going through the motions. The public didn't buy it, and the single only made it to #63 on the charts. I Love Only One Girl was another attempt to recapture the success of Did Ya Ever. It was just a mediocre song with new lyrics tacked onto an old French tune. It worked better in the movie, but on the record it fell flat. Then there was Old MacDonald. I sang it on the back of a truck full of chickens. It's a kid's song, and while Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald made it special, I just didn't have the heart for it. The arrangement was terrible, and I didn't put in the effort to make it work. It became one of the biggest jokes in my career. The other songs weren't much better. Could I Fall in Love was a nice ballad, but the recording had so much hiss it sounded like a rainstorm. Baby, If You'll Give Me All of Your Love was a formulaic rocker, and I sounded half asleep. There's So Much World to See was decent, but adding strings diluted the bluesy feel. It Won't Be Long was the best of the upbeat songs, but it was still nothing special. The album reached only #47 in the charts, which was my lowest placement at that point. It seemed like even my loyal fans were getting tired of the formula. Next up was Easy Come, Easy Go. Some critics were more forgiving, but the film had only 3 songs, which was a bit of a letdown. The title song was the best, with a brass section that gave it some life. The Love Machine was forgettable, and You Gotta Stop had a promising start but didn't deliver. Sing You Children was a gospel number that worked well with the brass, and I'll Take Love was professional but bland. She's a Machine was one of the better songs, even though it was cut from the film. Yoga Is As Yoga Does was just ridiculous with lyrics that made fun of yoga. I didn't like it, and neither did my friend Larry Geller. The soundtrack EP didn't chart, and it was clear that the formula was running out of steam. My commercial success was slipping, and even the gospel album, which did well, couldn't save the day. By the time Clambake came around, things were getting really bad. The movie looked cheap, and the script was weak. Critics were harsh, and even the title song, which was based on Shortenin' Bread, was just okay. My voice was starting to sound better, but the material was just not up to par. It was a tough time, and I knew I needed to do something different. The formula wasn't working anymore, and I was ready for a change. I remember working on Who Needs Money with Ray Walker. It was a duet, but it didn't feel like one. We weren't in the studio together, and it showed. Elvis made a couple of comments to Ray, but it didn't help. The song was long and not very good. It was almost like watching a bad movie that you can't turn off. Then came A House That Has Everything. This song was better, but it wasn't anything special. Some people, like Will Friedwald, really liked it. He said it was simple and beautiful, and that Elvis sang it with a lot of feeling. But to me, it was just another song on the album. Confidence was a real letdown. It was like listening to High Hopes again, but not as good. Elvis's voice sounded rough, and it didn't help that the song was boring. I don't think many people listened to the whole thing without skipping it. Hey, Hey, Hey was a rock and roll song about cleaning boats. I know it sounds weird. The music was okay, but the lyrics were ridiculous. I mean, who writes a song about goop and elbow grease? It was hard not to laugh. The Girl I Never Loved was a breath of fresh air. The song was pretty, and Elvis sang it with passion. The mix was a bit off, but Elvis's voice really shone, especially at the end of each verse. It was too bad it was so short. How Can You Lose What You Never Had was a bluesy song that stood out. Elvis's voice was rough again, but the song was good. The organ added a nice touch, and it was a shame it didn't make it into the movie. We also tried You Don't Know Me, but Elvis wasn't happy with it. He re-recorded it later for a better album. The Clambake album was a mixed bag. Some songs were terrible, like Who Needs Money, while others, like Guitar Man and Big Boss Man, were great. Critics didn't know what to think. Some said it was just another Elvis album, while others liked a few songs. When we moved on to Speedway, things were a bit better. The movie was fun, and the budget was higher than usual, but the critics weren't impressed. They said it was just another Elvis movie, and that he wasn't being used to his full potential. Some even said it was silly and not very original. The Speedway soundtrack was a real challenge. The title song was awful, and There Ain't Nothing Like a Song wasn't much better. Your Time Hasn't Come Yet Baby was a sweet song, and we hoped it would do well. It didn't, but it did better in the UK. Who Are You was a bland ballad, but Five Sleepy Heads was a nice lullaby. Let Yourself Go was the best song, and Suppose was a sad ballad that Elvis really liked. The most infamous song was He's Your Uncle Not Your Dad, a song about income tax. It was weird, but it was entertaining in the movie. We also added some extra songs to fill the album. Nancy Sinatra sang Your Groovy Self, which was better than most of Elvis's songs. The other bonus tracks were okay, but not great. The album didn't do very well in the charts. In September, we went back to the studio. Elvis was excited about Guitar Man and Big Boss Man, Both songs were rockers, and Elvis sounded great. Guitar Man even became a single. Then we recorded Mine, a pretty ballad, and Just Call Me Lonesome, an old country song. Both were nice but not groundbreaking. High Heel Sneakers was a different story. It was a long, rocking song that really showed Elvis's energy. We cut it short for the single, but the full version was epic. We also re-recorded You Don't Know Me, and it was a great ballad. That's the story of those sessions. Some songs were hits, some were misses, but it was always an adventure working with Elvis. I turned my attention to a song for Easter called We Call on Him. It's a quiet, sacred song that I originally thought about for my movie, Easy Come, Easy Go. But it never fit in with the upbeat songs of the movie. It has a similar feel to the first side of my How Great Thou Art album. I gave it a tender, committed performance and sang the wide-ranging melody as well as I could, even if it wasn't as easy as it used to be. The aside of the gospel single was You'll Never Walk Alone. I played the piano, and the song felt very different from the hit version by Jerry and the Pacemakers. While the final version was good, it didn't quite capture the magic of the unedited second take. In that take, I really got lost in the music, singing the end part over and over, trying to get every bit of feeling out of it. By the end, I was completely drained. It's a shame that this longer version was set aside in favor of a shorter, edited one. It's one of many times where my best recordings were ruined by editing. After that, I recorded Singing Tree, a pleasant country song. It's a nice track, but not as important as some of the other songs we recorded during those 2 nights in September 1967. I added a harmony vocal, which was a nice touch. I recorded 9 tracks in total, and they could have made a great album. But instead, they were spread out over singles and bonus tracks on Soundtrack LP. It's hard to understand why they didn't see the potential in these songs. 3 weeks later, on October 1st, 1967, I was back in the studio to record songs for the movie Stay Away, Joe. The movie was based on a 1953 novel, and it took over a decade for it to make it to the screen. The book was even made into a Broadway musical, but it flopped. MGM had hoped to make a big-budget screen musical, but when the stage show failed, they shelved the idea until 1967. We recorded 3 songs that day, all by Sid Wayne and Ben Weissman. The first was the title song, a short and raucous Ho Down. It was okay, but it didn't have much life outside the movie. The second song, All I Needed Was the Rain, was better. It had a country blues sound, similar to the singles from a few weeks earlier. My vocal was lovely, but it was tied to the movie. Still, it was a step in the right musical direction. The last song we recorded was Dominic, a silly song about an impotent bull. I made Felton Jarvis promise it wouldn't be released, but it appeared in 1994. The movie itself was a mess, and the reviews were poor. It was seen as offensive even back then, and the script was all over the place. In January 1968, I was back in the studio to record a song for Stay Away, Joe. We needed a song for the credits and to release as a single. We chose Stay Away, a reworking of the English folk song Greensleeves. The first try was slow and didn't work, so we did an up-tempo version. The instrumental was given a double-time feel, while I sang at the same pace. It's a pleasant song, and I really dug into the chorus. We also recorded Goin' Home, which had a similar theme but a less sweeping melody. I was in a weird mood that night, taking about 30 takes to get it right. We also did a country blues version of Chuck Berry's Too Much Monkey Business. Jerry Reed was there again, and his guitar playing was great, but my vocal felt a bit uninspired. It didn't really take off. The last song was U.S. Mail, a talking blues country-style song. It's more Johnny Cash than me, but I gave a great performance. The machismo in the lyrics has aged poorly, but it did better in the UK charts. In March 1968, I recorded 4 songs for the movie Live a Little, Love a Little. My career felt like it was over. My recent singles and soundtrack albums weren't doing well, and the TV special the Colonel had planned seemed like a long shot. But the TV special ended up being my comeback. For this session, we tried a new approach. Billy Strange arranged the songs in advance, and I recorded with a full orchestra for the first time. It worked well, and the orchestra spurred me on. Almost in Love, was a bossa nova song by Luis Bonfa. I loved the style, but the arrangement moved it more towards lounge music. Despite that, I managed to keep my own sound and handle the tricky melody. Edge of Reality was a funky, psychedelic song that fit the 60s. It was ruined in the movie by a bizarre setting, but the recording stood on its own. The orchestral backing gave it depth, and I had to sing with more power to match it. It became the higher charting side in Australia. A Little Less Conversation had a strange history. It was released as a B-side, and an early take was remixed in 2002 and became a hit. The master take is a fine, funky recording that could have been a hit after the TV special. Wonderful World was a bright, easy-listening song in waltz time. It was pleasant, but not as substantial as the others. The movie was another attempt to change the direction of my film career. Some reviews were positive, calling it more sophisticated than my previous films, but others saw it as one of my worst. Even co-star Ruddy Valley didn't understand my popularity. Just a few months later, I started work on the TV special. It's known as the Comeback Special and is famous for reviving my career. But I had already been recording some great material outside of the soundtrack sessions. Interest in me was growing even before the special. In February 1968, an article in the Los Angeles Times featured an interview with me and those who worked with me. I talked about the changes in music and recording, much like I did in the special later that year. It felt like things were finally starting to turn around. I remember those days in 1968 when things started to change for me. It was a weird time. I was still making movies, but they weren't the same old Elvis flicks anymore. People were starting to talk about me again, and not just because of the money I was making. They were curious, wondering what I was up to. I think it was because I was different, more serious about my music. I was on the set of a movie called Speedway, playing a millionaire playboy who races cars. It was a role I'd played before about 25 times, but something felt different. Maybe it was because I was starting to think more about who I was as an artist. I talked to a reporter about it, and he seemed to take me seriously for the first time in years. He asked me about my music, and I told him about the singers I admired when I was young sister Rosetta Tharpe, the Cowboy Singers, and Johnny Ray. I loved their music, and it influenced me a lot. Around that time, there were a bunch of articles about me. Some of them were a bit frustrating. One writer, Harold Hefferman, couldn't even get close to me on the set. He said I was a bit of a mystery, like a myth. But other reporters, like Vernon Scott, got to interview me. He noticed that I had changed, that I was more confident. I wasn't the same slick, pouting kid anymore. I was 33, and I was ready for something new. I told Scott that I was planning to do some live shows again. I missed the connection with the audience, and I wanted to see new places. I didn't end up touring Europe, but I was honest about wanting to get back on stage. It was a big deal because I hadn't done live shows in a long time. I think people were starting to pay attention because they sensed a change. Then in June 1968, I recorded a TV special. It was supposed to be a holiday show, but it turned into something else. We ended up doing a mix of production numbers and live performances. I wore a black leather suit, and it felt like I was back in the early days when I was just starting out. I sang songs like Trouble, Guitar Man, and Lottie Miss Claudie. I especially loved singing Baby What You Want Me to Do. I sang it over and over because I just couldn't get enough of it. The TV special had its ups and downs. Some parts, like the medley of Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, and All Shook Up, were a bit too polished, but the ballads were great. Can't Help Falling in Love and Love Me Tender were beautiful. The gospel medley was the highlight for me. I sang Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, Where Could I Go But to the Lord, Up Above My Head, and Saved. It was a joyous moment, and you could feel my passion for the music. The TV special was a turning point. It showed people that I was still the real deal, and it gave me the confidence to go back into the studio and record new music. I was ready to come back, and I think the world was ready for me again. As the curtain falls on this part of my story, I can't help but reflect on how my TV special of 1968 changed everything. That show was more than just a comeback, it was a statement. I wanted to remind everyone who I was and what I stood for. The special was a mix of everything, from the sit-down segments where I sang softer tunes like Blue Christmas, which the Colonel pushed for, even though it wasn't my favorite, to the raw, energetic performances like One Night and Tiger Man. The Tiger Man performance was a standout. I sang it like I meant it, rasping and growling through the lyrics. It was so powerful that it was released on record, even though it didn't make the original broadcast. When I went back to live shows the following year, Tiger Man became a staple, often mixed with Mystery Train to get the crowd going. Then there was Memories, a new song I sang with a backing track. It was a bit syrupy, but I sang it well, holding those long notes. It didn't quite fit the rock and roll vibe, but it showed a different side of me. The Guitar Man medley was ambitious and fun, even if some parts were cut due to time and censorship. The bordello scene with Let Yourself Go was a bit risky, but it was all part of the storytelling. The visuals were a bit much, but the energy was there. I even snuck in a little snippet of Nothingville, a weird, surreal bit that I wish we had more of. The highlight, though, was If I Can Dream. Standing alone on that stark stage, I poured my heart into it. It was a protest song, a plea for understanding, and it hit hard. The country was going through tough times, and this song felt like a way to connect with people. It was different from anything I'd done before, and it showed that I could evolve and grow as an artist. After the special, things started to shift. I was energized and ready to get back to live performances. The reviews were mixed at first, but over time, the special gained a reputation as a classic. People started to see it as a moment where I reclaimed my identity as a musician and a performer. In the studio, I worked on songs for the film Chero. The title song was a big, powerful Western theme, and I gave it everything I had. Let's Forget About the Stars was a pretty tune with interesting lyrics, but it didn't make it into the film. The movie itself was a letdown, and my performance was criticized. Some said I was just going through the motions, but a few critics saw something good in it. Then came The Trouble with Girls, a film I had been connected with for years. It was a mixed bag, with some people loving it and others not so much, but that's how it goes. You can't please everyone, but you keep doing what you believe in. As I look back, that TV special was a turning point. It wasn't just about the music, it was about me, who I was, and what I wanted to say. It was a one-time thing, but it set the stage for what was to come. I was back, and I was ready to make more music and more memories.